Good morning, everybody. My name is Sam Darting. I'm about to be doing 4 true scary stories you've never heard of. Let's do this with a scary video. Let's give this a thumbs up, like, subscribe, comment down below. Make sure you turn our post notification bells on. Let's get the video on the road. If you guys are new, my name is Sam Darting. Thank you guys for watching this awesome video. I hope you guys enjoy. What in the world?
The following stories are based on real events and were obtained from interviews conducted by Unit 522 and Tim Sonsky.
Creepy.
Some names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. These stories will contain disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised. This isn't a traditional creepy story where something unexplainable or horrible happened to me, but rather, what almost happened to me, what I almost became. Back in the early 1990s, I was in my late teens, and without question what could be described as a bad seed. My friends and I were just simply horrible people. We would throw rocks at stray cats and passing cars, bully younger kids and steal bicycles to take them on joyrides, where most of the time we would just leave them in the gully in the woods when we got bored with them. My parents tried to discipline me, but it never really stuck, and most of the time, they found it easier just to have me out of the house. I was an appalling kid, really. I cursed at my parents and teachers, talked back to the cops, and never used to feel sorry for anyone unless it was me. One night, my friend and I were smoking cigarettes on his back porch, and when his dad went to bed, my friend darted into the garage and returned with an old-fashioned handgun. I picked it up with both hands and started pointing it every which way, without a care in the world. He told me his dad had bought it a week ago off the street, and when he confirmed that it was loaded, the very first thing that entered my mind was, hey, we should go rob someone. I hid the gun in my waistband and walked down the street with my friend to the end of the cul-de-sac where we knew an old woman lived alone. We had no idea what exactly we wanted to rob from her. We just knew that she would be an easy target. We snuck around the back of the house and walked up onto her back porch, and I was able to force the locked door open just by putting my weight against it and jiggling the knob hard back and forth. As soon as the door was open, and the domestic old person smell from inside the house wafted over us, my friend lost his nerve and bolted away. He literally just said, "I changed my mind," and took off running. I walked right into the house without him, determined not just to take something, but I wanted to scare the woman as well. I walked through the kitchen and into the living room, where the old woman was sleeping on the couch. The TV was on, and the volume was turned down. I pointed my gun at her face. But after a moment, when she didn't open her eyes, I felt disappointed, and I walked around behind the couch. I held the barrel of the gun less than an inch away from her head, and in that moment, from the back of my mind, I kept hearing a voice whispering to me, "You can kill her. Do it." Having a weapon in my hand gave me an incredible feeling of power. I didn't have any intention of actually hurting the woman, but now that I was here, it seemed like the obvious thing to do. Without pausing to think, my fingers squeezed the trigger, but nothing happened. The safety was on, and the trigger was locked. Suddenly, the weight of what I nearly did hit me like a ton of bricks. I started shaking, and immediately lowered the gun. I power walked out of the living room, across the kitchen, into the back door. When I reached it, I paused, turned around, and saw the woman's eyes were open. She was looking right at me. There were tears in her eyes, and a look of terror on her face. Her fear immediately made me start tearing up. I ran back home, gave the gun to my parents, and confessed that I had nearly done something really bad. They called the police, and I confessed to having broken into an old woman's house with a gun. I didn't tell them about attempting to pull the trigger. I didn't tell them about my friend or where I got the gun either. I had to spend some time in juvenile hall for breaking and entering. But honestly, that was the best thing that could have happened to me. I'll never forget that night. I was on the path of self-destruction, and I very nearly crossed a line that would have ruined my life forever. It makes me sick, knowing exactly how close I came. I've never touched a gun since, and fortunately I managed to turn my life around. Please use this as a cautionary tale. All it takes is one deceptive thought at the wrong moment. You could destroy your future. Please, everyone, be smarter than I was.
I am an anti-feminist. Feminism is a mean...
Back in the late 90s, I used to have a serious drug problem. I was living in Las Vegas at the time, and after snorting my entire stash of coke, I would party, pass out, wake up, jack some cars, sell them, spend some money on food, and the rest would go to my dealer, and then I would snort again and repeat the entire process. One night in July, I broke into a panel van without windows. It was parked alone outside of a rat-infested motel. My gut told me that I should check the back before I drove away, but my mind was on my next fix, and I just floored it as soon as I got the engine started. I drove about an hour away into an isolated area of the desert, where I would meet my contact, who would check out the car, pay me in cash, and then drop me off at the nearest street corner. Once I put the van in park, I decided to check out the back. I figured there might be some tools or something back there that I could pawn for more cash. The back of the van was padlocked shut, which should have been my first clue, because when I smashed it open with my crowbar, I heard a high-pitched wailing from inside. I turned on my flashlight, and my stomach dropped. 4 Hispanic children, 2 boys and 2 girls, were tied up and gagged, lying on a handful of filthy cushions. They were all in tears and staring at me in absolute horror. I dropped the crowbar and backed away from the van a few steps. This was bad. Really fucking bad. I didn't know what to do. I had clearly stolen the van from a kidnapper or a human trafficker, and they would be looking to recover it, and likely shoot the asshole who took it from them. I decided not to call my contact. I knew him pretty well, and I was fairly certain that he would either kill the kids and dump their bodies in the desert, or shoot me for fucking this up. I made a snap decision. I climbed in the van and explained to them in both English and what Spanish I knew that I wasn't going to hurt them. I ungagged them and cut the bonds around their wrists, but I left their ankles tied. I couldn't risk them running off. I felt sick to my stomach with heartbroken guilt when I saw the welts around their hands. The stench of urine and sweat was heavy in the air. I climbed back in the driver's seat, drove back out of the desert, and at the first service stop I pulled in and parked. I went inside and bought 4 bottles of water and as many bags of snacks that I could afford. I carefully opened the back of the van and tossed the bag inside. Then I closed it again and walked across the lot. I made an anonymous phone call to the police from a payphone, and then walked to the next service station, where I had a friend come pick me up. After that night, I had my friend buy me a bus ticket to Texas, where I had an older brother who would let me stay on his couch. I got clean, and I ultimately turned my life around. I got an honest job, and I now have my own family and my own home. I remember being so relieved when I heard on the news that the kids had been found and were returned to their families in Mexico. You never know when life will give you a test like that and a chance to prove your character. I like to think that those kids helped me as much as I helped them. When I was a kid, I lived in an extremely low-income apartment complex in Baltimore with my grandmother. My building was infested with drug dealers and criminals who would kill you if you even looked at them the wrong way. Remember the building in the movie The Raid: Redemption, where every floor was essentially another level of murderous assholes you had to face before reaching the main boss at the top floor? Yeah, that was my life. If my grandmother and I had any other place to go, we would have left. But she was old and frail, and we couldn't exactly just wander the streets. Some of the floors in my building were used for manufacturing drugs, and some were used for distribution. Several times at night we would hear arguing and gunfire beneath us, and the air on the staircase always smelled tainted with the coppery hint of blood, and I tried to imagine all the bodies that had been dragged down the stairs. Sometimes I would be harassed by guys in the hall. They would try to threaten me into transporting drugs for them to another crack house across town, but I always declined. I didn't want to be involved. But I got mugged by a rival gang pretty frequently, and they would likely steal any drugs I was carrying. I got smacked around a bit sometimes, but most of the time, they would leave me be. It's funny how normal that lifestyle became. Seeing guns in the hallways every day didn't even faze me after a while, and it rarely bothered me when I heard people getting beaten right outside our door with baseball bats and tire irons. I would just hold my grandmother real tight until the noise stopped, knowing our door was locked, but I was always aware that it was their indifference that kept us more protected than our deadbolt. One day I returned home from school to find our apartment door wide open. I went inside to discover 6 men with assault rifles and shotguns gathered around our kitchen table. One of them grabbed me by the neck and dragged me across the kitchen and into my grandmother's bedroom where she was sobbing on the bed. I ran to her and held her as they closed the door behind us. I'm not sure how long we were in there, but eventually the men in the kitchen went quiet, and we heard an explosion of gunfire from outside the bedroom. The noise was so deafening, we both laid on the ground with pillows pressed to our ears, trying to muffle the roar of the assault rifles. When the silence fell again, it was nearly as deafening as the shots being fired. My ears were ringing as the bedroom door was kicked in, and a man with a black bandana covering his face walked in. He scanned the room, pointed his rifle at my grandmother and I for a few moments, and then walked back out of the room. It was nearly 30 minutes before I summoned the courage to get up and peek out into the kitchen. All 6 of the men who had been gathered around the table before were bullet-ridden and bloody and scattered around like rag dolls across our apartment. I took my grandmother's hand, and we walked out of the apartment and never looked back. The police never came. A neighbor on the ground floor took us in for a night, and the following day, we went to my school together and told my teacher what happened. The school eventually found us a shelter to stay in. The building was eventually raided by police and torn down soon after. We never went back to collect our things, but that didn't bother me. As far as I was concerned, we had barely escaped that apartment with our lives, so there was no way we were ever going back. In 2011, on my 21st birthday, I took it upon myself to go backpacking through the Canadian mountains all on my own. I had gone backpacking and camping many times before, but never on my own. I wanted this birthday's significance to be rooted in the fact that I had challenged the great outdoors all on my own. On my 3rd day out, I reached my destination. It was an old farmhouse sitting on its own in an overgrown field, out in the middle of nowhere. I had discovered it on Google Earth and was eager to check it out before heading back. In addition to a first aid kit, a compass, and a utility knife, I was carrying a Smith & Wesson Governor revolver, which carried 6 shots. It was the crown jewel of my father's collection, and he had loaned it to me for protection while I was out in the woods alone. He made sure that I had practiced with it several times and knew how to use it before I set off. And now, as I approached the farmhouse, I was pleased that I had taken the time, because I wasn't entirely sure the place was abandoned. Every window on the ground floor was boarded up, and a faded plastic pinwheel spun lazily from where it was stuffed into the dirt by the front door. I walked right up the front steps, and feeling somewhat foolish, I knocked. When no one answered, I walked around the perimeter of the house. There was an ancient rusty fire escape hanging down from one of the upstairs windows, and an old single-door refrigerator lying on its side out amongst the tall grass. When I walked back around to the front door of the house again, I tried the knob. It was rusty, but I managed to turn it with both hands, and the door swung open with a creak. I was just about to walk in when I felt the sensation of eyes on me, and I spun around. Out by the tree line, I saw what appeared to be a man with a long gray beard staring at me. I immediately felt foolish and guilty and waved at him, my other hand reaching into my belt to rest on the handle of the gun. "Hi there. Is this your place? I'm sorry. I'll leave." For maybe 10 seconds, the man just stared at me. Then, without saying anything, he turned and walked back into the trees. That made me nervous. I didn't know how to interpret it, and the last thing I wanted to do was walk back into the woods knowing that he was out there. I decided to enter the house and close the door behind me. I slid a dusty stool in front of the door, so I would hear it tip over if anyone entered. I spent the next hour exploring the house, occasionally glancing out of the windows to see if the man had reappeared. When it finally began getting dark out, I was still nervous and unwilling to leave the house, so I walked up a narrow flight of stairs to the attic, locked the door behind me, set up my gas lantern, and unrolled my sleeping bag. After a light dinner, I updated my journal, turned off the light, and prepared to get some sleep. But after a minute or so, I heard creaking on the stairs, and my eyes shot open. I looked over towards the door, and I heard the faint sound of footsteps climbing the narrow staircase. I threw myself out of the sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight and my gun, and pointed them both towards the door. I called out, "Who's there? If I'm trespassing, I'm sorry. I'll pack up and leave. Just don't try to open the door. I have a gun." The footsteps continued to climb without hesitation. When they were just outside the door, I heard the doorknob rattle. I made my voice sound as furious as I could. "Don't try to get in. I told you I have a gun. Just tell me who you are." There was a moment of hesitation, and then the doorknob began to jiggle harder. "Stop it! I'll fucking shoot." I made myself count to 5, but the doorknob continued to jiggle violently. "Last chance." I made myself count to 5 again, and when the jiggling didn't stop, I fired 2 shots through the door, aiming low, intending to hit the stranger's legs. As soon as the shots rang out, the knob stopped jiggling, and there was silence. There was no sound of anyone falling backwards down the steps or a gasp in pain. There was just silence. I kept the gun up and cautiously walked towards the door. I unlocked it and opened it. I nearly shat myself when I saw there was nothing standing there. There was no blood, no body, no indication that anyone had been standing there. I slammed the door, locked it again, and dragged an ancient rusty armchair in front of the door to block it. For the next several hours, I would doze off for a while and then wake up again, keeping my gun nearby until the sun rose. After it was light enough, I gathered my belongings and crawled out of the window and went down the fire escape. But when I was about 20 steps away from the house, I turned, and looking back at me from the attic window was the bearded old man. I drew my gun and aimed it at him, but I didn't shoot. I did it as a warning not to follow me. Then I sprinted back into the woods. 2 years later, in the summer of 2013, I returned to the house with 4 of my friends and showed them all the bullet holes in the attic door. I still go camping every now and then, but I always make sure I bring my handgun, because you never know who might be watching you from the shadows.
If you guys love these true stories of scary stories you never heard, let's give this thumbs up, like, subscribe, and comment down below which other stuff I should react to. And thank you guys for watching this awesome video. Give me a subscribe, hit that subscribe button, turn on post notification bells on, leave a thumbs up, and leave a friend comment down below. Thank you guys for watching this awesome video. Have a great day, guys. Bye.